Once in a little village not that far from here, there was a problem. Animals had started dying off, one by one. In the morning their owners would see them lying outside with 10 holes in their chest. The people thought it was the work of their neighboring town, insert name. Then, one night a man by the name of Fred was closing his store for the night. It was very late, and he was anxious to get home to his family. He shut off all the lights, then closed the door with a satisfying click. As he turned around to go to his car he saw a dark shape in the distance. He stood still trying to make out what it was. As it got closer, Fred turned to go. It was the last move he ever made. The next day they found him with 10 holes in his chest. This made the town quite worried. They were scared of more people getting killed. So, one night 2 brave brothers, John and Jacob, went out to get rid of the problem. They each took knives and walkie-talkies. They said goodbye to their father, and kissed their grandmother on the way out. The 2 boys decided to split up. One would go by the site of the murder, and the other would wander the streets. If one was attacked they could use their walkie-talkie to contact the other. So they set off, keeping a close eye on the shadows. Nothing seemed to be happening. It was a calm night, and it seemed like they would get home safely. But then suddenly John heard a crackling in the bushes behind him. He tried to call his brother, but it was too late. The figure leaped out of the bushes and tackled him, gouging his chest with its nails. Luckily Jacob heard the commotion and rushed to help him. He leaped through the air and cut off the creature's right hand. The creature screamed and ran. Jacob took John to the hospital, and they bandaged him home. The doctors called them heroes, and finally, they got home at 6 that morning. Only their grandmother was up, so they said good morning, then went back to bed. Neither of them noticed she was missing her hand.
The car finally gave out. Jeff hit the dashboard in frustration. It was bad enough that the car had to break down, but at night, in the rain, in the middle of God knows wherever he was, it was a fitting end to his bad week. The week had seen his wife leave him, taking the kids with her. He had been demoted at his job and was now forced to go back on the road as a salesman. Now, this had happened, and things weren't going to get any better anytime soon. Jeff decided that he might as well try to find a way out of this mess. He considered waiting in his car for another car to come by and help him. The road wasn't often used though, and that might take hours, so Jeff decided to first walk down the road to see if there were any other choices. After walking for a half hour in the pounding rain, Jeff finally came across an old house in the woods. Now Jeff had seen enough horror movies to make him turn back, but the rain alone was enough to override his sense of fear and trepidation. He walked up the winding road to the door. The house looked to be very old and not kept up well, and Jeff wondered if anyone even lived there anymore. He knocked on the door, and to his surprise, it was answered rather quickly. An older man, looking to be in his late 70s, asked him what he wanted. Jeff explained his situation and asked if the man had a phone or some way to help. The old man said he was wary of travelers, but decided that Jeff looked honest enough, and let him use his phone. Jeff thanked him and asked his name. He said his name was Joseph Palmer and told Jeff the number of the nearest garage. Jeff made his way through to the phone, noticing that the house looked about as old inside as it did outside, and was surprised that there was even a phone at the place. He called the garage, but they said there was nothing they could do until the morning, and they would meet him at noon at his car. Mr. Palmer offered Jeff the guest room to sleep in for the night. Jeff was a bit wary at spending the night in such a spooky old house but decided that the walk back in the rain and sleeping in the car couldn't be much safer than staying at the house. He accepted, and was shown to the room. The house was adorned with antique everything. Not a piece of furniture seemed to have been purchased in at least the last 60 years or more. Mr. Palmer showed him the room and bided him good night. The man was nice, but the whole situation still left Jeff unnerved. He just tried to tell himself that he had watched far too many horror movies as a child. The bedroom had a canopy bed, one old lamp, a single window, and a red carpet. The house was eerily quiet as Jeff laid himself down on the bed. Quiet except for a creak here, and a thump there. By now, Jeff's imagination had him too paranoid to sleep, as he heard Mr. Palmer outside the room, walking up and down the hallway outside. Up he went, and down he went. Then, the footsteps stopped, right outside his room. Jeff waited, yet nothing happened. A half hour passed, and yet he heard nothing except the rain beating outside, and the wind howling as the storm blew on. Finally sleep slowly overcame Jeff, even with his nervousness heightened. Slowly, his eyes closed, though he thought he could almost hear something scratching at his door. Jeff awoke, the storm had passed, and daylight was shining through the window curtains. Happy that all his nervousness was for nothing, Jeff got out of bed, and checked his watch. He had slept in until 11:20, and had to leave quickly before the people from the garage got to his car. Leaving the room, he was greeted by Mr. Palmer. Palmer asked him if he had slept well. Jeff replied that he had, though he had trouble falling asleep. Palmer laughed and asked if he was afraid of the old house at night in the middle of nowhere. Jeff admitted that maybe he was a bit afraid, but he felt silly for it now. He thanked Palmer, and said he had to leave quickly to get to his car. He turned to leave, when suddenly, something banged his head and everything went quite dark. When Jeff came to, he was tied to a chair in the basement. The place reeked of horrible smells. Mr. Palmer walked up to him, with a large knife in his hand. Jeff screamed and tried to free himself, but only tired himself out. He looked up in horror at Mr. Palmer, and asked him why he was doing this, and why now. Palmer answered that last night, he would have been nervous, full of fear, and ready for any attack Palmer would do. No, that wasn't the right time. Everyone expects attacks at night. But during the morning. People are more relaxed and the fear is low, making them blind to any chance of harm. Jeff asked him again, why was he doing this? What was he going to do with him, and said someone, like the garage people, would find out what happened. Mr. Palmer said that mishaps happen on highways at night, mainly during storms, so hardly anyone would even think twice as to why he was gone. If anyone actually did start asking questions. Palmer said he had ways to discourage that kind of activity. As for why he was doing this, Palmer simply said that Jeff need not worry about that. In fact, he need not worry about anything anymore. Jeff looked into Palmer's eyes as he walked towards him. His eyes were completely black, and Jeff tried to scream.
There's a girl driving along I-70 on the way back to Colorado after visiting her relatives in Illinois. It's about 1 a.m. and it starts raining when she realizes she's almost out of gas. She sees a sign for a gas station about 3 miles ahead and breathes a sigh of relief. But when she gets there, she sees it's one of those old rundown family-owned gas stations. She's scared to stop, but she really has no other choice. As she pulls in, an old man with a disfigured face comes running through the rain. He puts the pump in the tank and asks for her credit card. She hands it to him over the top of the window and he runs back inside. After a few seconds he comes back out and tells the girl she will have to come inside. Her card had been denied. Reluctantly, she walks inside. The old man grabs her and tries to tell her something, but she hits him with a can of oil sitting on the counter. She runs back to her car and takes off with the old man screaming and flailing his arms at her. After driving for a few miles, she turns on the radio and starts to relax. As she looks in the rearview mirror, she sees someone pop up in the back seat holding an axe above their head. It's the last thing she ever sees. Apparently, the old man at the gas station was trying to warn her.
Creak, a sound, faint, distant, but still heard. Crack, something snapping or being trampled on. The man sits in his room reading. The room is silent except for the quiet fire burning. Creak. Just the old house settling, nothing more. Crack. Perhaps some small animals outdoors. Whoosh. Was that the wind? The man stands up and peeks out the window. A clear night is all he sees. The full moon, brilliant, the sky. Laughing at his nervousness, he returns to his book. Creak. The man slowly, silently chuckles at the sound. Crack. How could he have been scared of some sounds? Whoosh. Must be breezy out tonight. Thump. Did that come from within the house? The man stares into the fire, trying to calm his jangled nerves. Creak. Crack. Whoosh. Will the sound never cease? Thump. 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 Closer, he thinks, the sounds are getting. He shuts the book and closes his eyes and thinks of something besides his wild imagination. Creak. Thump. Crack. Thump. Whoosh. Thump, thump, thump. A pause. The man moves quietly, slowly towards the door, with a nervous gait. Thump. A step back. Thump. Yes. It's getting closer. Thump. He stares at the door, trying to somehow see through it. Thump. He reaches slowly for the doorknob, hand shaking, no longer able to take the not knowing. Creak. A loose floorboard, near the door, outside. Thump. He slowly opens the door. A scream.
The number 12B train was on its usual journey from Royston to Moncton, taking workers to and from the coking factory. The day was supposed to be wet and gloomy, and a mist is said to have swept in from the east that cold autumn night. The moon was full looking over Royston that night, but still wives and children waited patiently for the men to return home, safely. The train hurried along that night, leaving behind the company of the factory, and entered the bleak and lonely night. The train was nearing the tunnel that night, but the driver saw an old man crossing the tracks, so he ordered the train to halt. It was too late. The man was hit, and the driver wondered where the man's body was until the old man appeared before him and stated these words: "Sleep safely this night, as it will be your last." Everyone who was on that train died mysteriously that night, and the tracks were closed, but now the superstition has passed and the tracks will open again.
When I was 18, I started babysitting my aunt's youngest 3 kids. I always got a very uneasy feeling when I went into her house. The only reason I agreed to stay in house was because I was just out of high school and I needed the money. You need to know that her house is a bi-level. When entering her house, you have to go either upstairs, to the right, or downstairs, to the left. Almost right away, weird things started to happen. At first, it was small things like thumping on the walls, things going missing, and so on. But then things started getting more and more scarier. One morning I was in the kitchen fixing their breakfast while the 3 kids, ages 5 to 9, were in the living room watching TV. From where I was standing I could see all 3 of them sitting on the couch. The middle girl got up to go to the bathroom. Halfway down the hall, she turned around, ran back to me and started crying. When I asked what was wrong, she said she saw a man walk from her room to her brother's room. My first thought was, oh my God, someone is in the house. I made the 3 kids go outside while grabbed a ball bat and searched both rooms. No one was there. I asked her to tell me what he looked like. She described in detail the clothes he was wearing. I have to tell you, she is not the kind of kid that makes up things, and just by seeing how scared she was, I knew she was telling the truth. There are so many things that happened that it would take me forever to describe them to you. Several weeks later, all 4 of us were eating breakfast in the living room when we heard someone, it sounded like a girl or a young boy, say help, and then the sound of someone falling down the stairs. Now while everything that happened upstairs was scary, none of it felt like it would be harmful. I cannot say the same thing about downstairs. I would not even let the kids go down there by themselves. I call the area the center point of evil. One day in the spring we had horrible thunderstorms. The schools had let the kids out early because of the weather. Around 4 o'clock a tornado watch was issued. As much as I hated the downstairs, we all went down there for our safety. All 4 of us were huddled in a pile in the far corner of the room. From where we were we could see down the small hallway into the laundry room. All of a sudden a black figure in the form of a person started to come out of the laundry room, paused, and then started moving down the hallway. I did the only thing I could think of. I asked my great-grandfather for help. He is always the spirit I turn to for strength. I said, "Grandpa, I'm so scared." As soon as I said this, the thing disappeared. I have no idea if this was a coincidence or if my grandpa had something to do with it. Shortly after this happened I quit. I could not take it anymore. My aunt still lives in the house and I refused to go farther than her front yard.